to Matthew 17. I figure since it's a new year, we should start off and talk about new starts. And we're going to talk about this year starting small. Starting small. We're going to take some small steps and hopefully we will see some big results. But one things I love about our Christian faith is results are not dependent upon us. Results happen because God is in it, not because of what we do or don't do. Results are because God is an all-powerful, supreme God, and the results are all His. And we'll see that today in our text and in our study. It's going to be a little bit, it's a one-time sermon, so it's going to have a lot of things in here that we're going to try to pack in just a short amount of time. So either you can take really good notes, you can steal my notes later, or you can watch it online after it gets posted this afternoon, and you can watch it as many times as you need to. But today we're going to read a story about how disciples tried to do something, they failed at it, and then Jesus stepped in and took care of the rest. So Matthew chapter 17, we're going to start reading in let's go ahead and read verse 14, and we're going to read all the way down to verse 20. So it says, when they reached the crowd, a man approached and knelt down before him, said, "Lord, have mercy on my son, because he has seizures and suffers terribly. He often falls into the fire and falls into the water, and I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't heal him." And Jesus said, "You unbelieving and perverse generation, how long will I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring him here to me." Then Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and from that moment on, the boy was healed. Then the disciples approached Jesus privately and said, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" "Because of your little faith," he told them. "For truly I tell you, if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, you will tell this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will be moved. Nothing will be impossible for you." Isn't it interesting? New Year's. How many of you made New Year's resolutions? Nobody? No one? Okay, we're not calling them New Year's resolutions anymore because we know how that goes. But let's say, do you have any goals or any plans for this year? Those are resolutions, people. Okay, all right. Maybe after this sermon you might have ideas for more. But New Year's resolutions, I always love this because so often we don't make them because we know, studies have shown us, 80% of them will fail within January. So in the next 30 days, we know New Year's resolutions, they're all going to fail anyways. But I went in and looked up some of the top New Year's resolutions. Of course, some of them make sense. Exercise more. Anybody? No? Okay. Yeah, want to, but no, realistically, I'm not, no. Lose weight. Yeah, that's always, again, a good goal to have, but realistically, we know it's not going to happen. Organize more, get organized better. Yeah, that would be nice, right? Except for when you look in the garage or the attic or the basement or wherever you have all your extra stuff. Yeah, it's not going to happen. Be better with my money. Either save more or be budget better or something like that. Quit buying random things would be a good idea. Stop eating out so much would be another one. When the fast food restaurant employees know your order when you pull up. Of course, now we just do it on an app so they know it anyways. But I always love this one. It was just one of the top 10. I'm not trying to point any fingers, okay? Don't worry. But it made the top 10, and I find it very interesting. Quit smoking. So my parents had done a lot of smoking when I was growing up. And I don't know how many times my dad decided, I'm going to quit smoking. And it lasted about that long. And then it started up. And so it was interesting because we often have these goals and we know that 80% of them are going to fail. Why? Most of the time it's because we set unrealistic expectations upon ourselves. We don't have a good idea of what is a reasonable goal to set and what is kind of too far out of our reach. I mean, we have these things that we plan and we dream, and as a matter of fact, that's what we teach kids nowadays. They teach them things such as think big, dream big, plan big. And somehow when we think about trying to do little things, somehow it comes across as like it's a bad thing. Thinking too small. Setting too small of a goal. You know, when I first started trying to build up part of my savings and get in the habit of savings, you know what it was? $1 a week. And then once you got into that habit, you put on another $1. And eventually you get to the point where, I mean, saving $30 a month doesn't sound like a big deal until you try to save all $30 all at once and car breaks down, you need gas to go somewhere else, you have a doctor's bill to pay. But what's funny is when you do make small changes consistently, it can result in some things. Result in some things that are good for us, that are beneficial to us. I love this. We have such a view on these big ideas versus small ideas. You know, we don't like to think small. We don't like to dream small. We even have this saying called the devil is in the details, right? That the small things are what the devil's going to use to distract us. I think it's the opposite. Honestly, I think we need to change that phrase and put in there, instead of the devil is in the details, the divine is in the details. The divine, God himself, is in the small details. And I love this about our God, our big God who does big things. I mean, this story is him casting out a demon and healing a little boy with seizures and chronic seizures and dangerous seizures and everything. And we see God do some big things, but I love how this all-powerful, all-knowing, ever-present God is in such the small details. He cares about the little things of our lives. I love this. His fingerprints are all over the universe. How many of you, I always love this. I love looking up at the night sky. Especially up here where we live. I mean, you get to see stars forever. And I love that we think about God of the universe, and his fingerprints are all over the universe. He created it. He holds all of the stars in his hand, the Bible tells us. But yet, his fingerprints go all the way down to our DNA. He's in the big, but he's also in the very small. He knows, as we've sung and we've studied, he knows time from beginning to the end. He knows all of history before it's ever happened. But yet, he cares about the sparrow. And he cares about the hairs on our heads. I never understood that one. Why would God want to know how many hairs are on my head? Just really not. Especially when you study that and then you start seeing hairs fall off and you're like, God, what are you doing? But January 1st, new year, as we look ahead to this next year for us, in our own lives as well as in the life of our church, this message that Jesus has here is relevant to us today. And we often read this as like Jesus is mad. Jesus is upset with his disciples. That's not it at all. He does get frustrated at the unbelieving generation around him because the crowd had gathered just to see miracles done. That's what he is sitting there saying. Unbelieving, perverse generation, how long will I put up with you? How long must I deal with you? That's why the crowd was there, to see if Jesus could do something like this. That's what he's getting mad about. But the disciples come up to him privately. And when Jesus says, because of your little faith, I tell you, if you had the faith the size of a mustard seed, and we're going to get into that, it's kind of like, if you understand what Jesus is saying, he's saying it's not the fact of that you didn't have faith, it's where you tried to put your faith. And we're going to see that. But I love the question, why can't we? And as we think about our lives, I'm sure there's things in your life spiritually that you're sitting there thinking, God, why can't I? Why can't I get into the habit of studying your word more? Why can't I get into the habit of praying more? Why can't I get into the habit of, and you can list it, and you ask that question, God, why can't I? And Jesus is ready to answer that question, but it's probably not the answer that you are expecting. But let me go back here for a second here. I want to talk to us for just a moment about the danger of big. The danger of big. We have big ideas, we have big plans, we have big hopes and dreams. Sometimes, just like with New Year's resolutions, they're too big. Unrealistically big. The disciples here, we know a little bit of the backstory because it's also found in Mark. Mark chapter 9 is where we get a little bit more of the details of what's going on here. The disciples were going around and they were trying to do big things in the name of Jesus. Which sounds great. They were trying to go out and help people and share God's love with them and show them that God has all power over every situation. But I want you to see that the danger of big is that they tried and they failed. Now, I don't know why they were trying to do big things. I really don't. Were they trying to impress Jesus? Like, you know, he's the master rabbi. He's our teacher. we need to get his attention and we need to impress him. Let's try doing the things that he does, that he makes it look so easy. Let's just try and see if we can do the same things as Jesus. I don't know if that's it. I don't know if they were trying to imitate him. You know, Jesus can do this, and if we're his disciples, we can do it as well. We need to do it. If we're going to call ourselves the disciples of Jesus, we need to do exactly like Jesus did. Maybe they were trying to emulate him, trying to do one better. Because, you know, in that day and age, you had to be the number one disciple to take over that rabbi's spot when he was gone. Maybe some of the disciples were trying to say, you know what? I want that next spot. I want to be the next Jesus. Okay, when we say it out loud, that sounds funny, right? I want to be the next Jesus. Yeah, there's only one Jesus. And it's not you. It's not me. So, I don't know why they were trying to do it, but they tried and they failed. And what we see here is that the danger of trying big things, of trying to do these big ideas, these big dreams, these big hopes, is that, first of all, we'll see in the story here, they minimized people. They minimized people. When we try to do things too big, too soon, and we'll just run people over. Notice here, the father comes to Jesus and he says, I brought my son to your disciples to get healing, and they couldn't. And so what does the father have to do? He has to track down Jesus. Because why? we don't see here that the disciples brought him to Jesus. The disciples had abandoned him. They said, you know what? Since we can't heal your son, I'm sorry. God's just not going to do that for you. Oh, that's a bad response. To say that God's not going to do something just because God is not going to do it through you is there's so many things wrong with it. I don't have time today to get into it, okay? Just know that that's not the answer. But the disciples tried to heal this boy and they could not, so they just left. And imagine that father, what he's going through. He's sitting there and he's trying to think of, how can I help my son? My son is suffering and he's a danger to himself and others. I need God. I need something to help him, to help me help him. And so what happens is this father, after taking him to the disciples and being abandoned, felt ignored, felt frustrated, felt forgotten. I remember when our daughter was a newborn, she had a whole bunch of health issues. And we had a doctor that we were working with, and we thought that her doctor was a good doctor. It's probably one of the best pediatricians in the area at the time. And because the doctor couldn't figure out what's wrong with our daughter, she finally, and I kid you not, she reported us for failure to thrive, keeping our daughter back. She thought we weren't feeding our daughter enough. Our daughter was eating. My kids eat, and they know how to eat, and they like to eat a lot. I know, I just fed them for a week in my house. But it wasn't because of a failure to thrive. It's because my doctor didn't know what to do with my daughter, that she just abandoned it. She minimized us and made us the problem instead of really trying to figure out what's going on. When we try to do too big of things too quickly, we minimize people, but we also risk too much. When we try to do big things for God, we are risking a lot, aren't we? We put a lot on the line trying to impress God or trying to get others to pay attention to God. I'm sorry, God doesn't need our help with his PR. God doesn't need us to be a hype man for him. If God can create the universe, he can get someone's attention without our help. But the cost of trying to do things too big often isn't worth the risk. Look at the story. The disciples tried to do this big thing, and they risked so much. What did they risk? They risked their own reputation. Can you imagine how the Father talked about these disciples, whichever disciples he dealt with? Oh, don't take your prayer request to him. They don't pray for you. Or if it doesn't work, then they stop praying for you. You know, there are still prayer requests I'm praying for, and it's like 25, 26 years later. It's not because God hasn't answered those prayers. It's because the timing still hasn't been right. I trust God's going to answer those prayers. Even if it takes 40, 50 years, God still is going to answer the prayers, but their reputation when they tried to do something too big was that of don't trust Jesus' disciples. Don't look at their ministry. They risked this man's faith in Jesus. I'm glad that this man had enough common sense as well. The disciples are the low man on the totem pole. Let's go straight to the teacher. But a lot of people, if they had this interaction, I need you to pray about this. I have this situation in my life. Oh, yes, let's pray that God does this huge thing. And when it doesn't work, we just stop praying. Can you imagine their faith? They're like, I ain't going to trust any Christians anymore. They also risked the son's health. That's why I have an issue with a lot of the healing ministries. I believe that God can heal us. I am living proof that God can do miracles with someone's health. But I am not going to risk another person's health on some idea that I'm going to pray and lay hands on, or I'm going to breathe on them and they're going to be just miraculously healed. Why? I'm not going to put their health at risk. I fully believe that God can heal all medical things, but I also believe that God has given us wisdom with modern medicine to do a lot of good things too. I think there needs to be that all in. But again, because the disciples risked big and tried to do big, they were putting so much on the line that it just was not smart. Again, I want you to realize that God is and God can do big things. Our God is completely capable. I am not saying that God can't do these things. I'm saying that we as human beings need to understand the risks and the dangers going along with this. The other thing is, I think that the disciples' personal pride got in the way here with trying to do things too big. Big often has this desire attached to it that this is going to be something that we get to brag about. Man, did you see? I prayed and that kid was healed, and man, my prayers are powerful. I think you got it messed up there. The personal pride here is taking the focus off of God. Instead of worshiping God and praising God for what only God can do, there's that danger of saying, look at me, look at us. We're so good, God blesses us in this way. The disciples here might have been trying to get Jesus' attention. They might have been trying to say, look at me, Jesus. Or they might have been thinking, if I could do this thing, then God's going to, or Jesus is going to do this in my life. There are some very big, dangerous risks to trying big things. But I love this because about this time in my studies, I'm sitting here, there's still something that like is hitting me here, because I've heard so many messages and I've heard so many people say, well, we need to try big things for God. Do you ever hear that? Try big things for God. Or maybe we're reminded and we're told, and we see this on bumper stickers or on Christian merchandise, nothing is impossible. Or maybe you've heard this one, you can never outdream God. Have you heard any of those? Yeah, I've heard a lot of those. And that's why maybe it's nagging in the back of my mind, like, okay, I see, God, that trying big things is dangerous. I see that in the text, and I see that throughout your word many times. You know, the fact that you are a big God, but you care about the very small details of our lives. So why do we have this idea that we need to do these big things? We have to have this mentality that we're going to swing for the fences in our faith. I remember that. I only played like one season of baseball, so I don't consider myself a baseball player, but I remember that. I always had that feeling, and the reason why I only played one season is because I wasn't very good at baseball. But I remember getting up to bat, and I always wanted to hit the home run, right? We always wanted to hit the big home run, get people home, and be the hero of the story. Why do we always have that desire for the big? Well, let's go back to those three things real quick. I want to correct them so you just don't have them hanging around. The first one, try big things for God. Actually, it comes from a quote from the great missionary William Carey, who actually said, expect great things from God. Don't try big things, expect big things from God, because God is the one who's going to do it. The other one, nothing is impossible. We read this during our Christmas series because Mary was one who said, with God, nothing is impossible. Again, focus on God. With God, nothing is impossible. Not saying that nothing is impossible for you. I remember having this idea, again, going back to my sports. I know not a lot of people are sports people here, okay? But I am, so I'm going to use these stories. So just follow along with me. But I remember I wanted to be a basketball player. And I remember hearing, well, with God, nothing is impossible. I can be a basketball player. Okay, when I was in high school, my father quoted the movie Rudy to me. I was 5 foot nothing, 100 nothing. And so why would I expect to be a basketball player when they're like 6 feet tall? Nowadays, they're like 7 feet tall. Freaks of nature, they're huge. But the Bible does say nothing is impossible with God. If God wanted me to be a basketball player, he probably would have made me taller and more coordinated. And then the last one, you can never outdream God. We get this idea from 1 Corinthians 2:9, where it says that what no eye has seen, no ear has heard, what no human mind can conceive, the things that God has prepared for those whom he loves. Again, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind can comprehend. We have this idea that they're big ideas. What if it's the small things that God has planned for us that we just don't think about? And so our mind can't comprehend how God will love us with the small things. How God will bless us with the small things. How God will get our attention with the small things. If there's one phrase that I want you to remember from today, it's this one. Have a little faith in a great God. Have a little faith in a great God. All these things go back to trusting God, believing in God. God is the one who's going to do big things. We need to focus on the small. Jesus here redirects the disciples' attention because of your little faith. If you have the faith of a mustard seed, I will tell you, you will tell the mountain to move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. As we begin the new year of 2023, God's word reminds us that the small things are what matter the most for us. The small things. I love this verse. Zechariah 4:10, he actually says, the Lord is speaking to Israel, and he says, who despises the day of small things? Who despises these things? So when we're thinking about 2023, I want this to be our plan. 2-step plan. 1, start small. I want us to start small. I want us to focus on the small things. I want us to see that the small things are where we can see God the most. If we're always looking for those big things, we're going to miss God. I got a question for you. Where have you seen God this morning already? I've seen God in a lot of different ways. In the small things. The small things like someone stepping up to do something that they normally don't do because someone else is not here. The small things in holding a door open and greeting someone as they come in the door. The small things. It's the small things that matter the most. Proverbs 30 tells us this. We did a study in Proverbs last year, and it's just short sayings that have impact or spiritual meaning. Proverbs 30, verse 24 through 28, but specifically this verse is verse 24. It says, 4 things on earth are small, and yet they are extremely wise. It's the ants, the hyrax, the locust, and the lizard. Or some of your translations will say spider, but I figured you'd be grossed out if I put a picture of a spider on the screen. But it's also translated lizard. And so look at these things. These are small. The ants, they're very, very small. So small that some of them are nearly microscopic. There are some ants that are so small, but yet what do? They save up. They work hard all year long for the time of winter or drought or of a season where they're in need. They have plenty because they work together on small things. They work together. Seeing an ant colony is amazing. Why? Because it's just ants moving one grain of sand at a time. But then they create this huge living complex that these ants live in. But also I thought of this. Ants are small until you sit on an ant pile. Then they're not so small, are they? Hyraxes. I had to look this one up. What is a hyrax? It's this little tiny rock squirrel almost. You can see it on the screen. It's this rock squirrel about no bigger than a branch right there on the screen, but they are the relative of the elephant. They are a direct relative to the elephant, one of the largest land mammals. And then we see the hyrax is such a small animal, but yet it's so powerful it breaks rocks. Because where they put their living quarters are they create caves in solid rock for their living spaces. These small animals create such a big impact by doing small things. And then we have locusts. Locusts, so small. One locust, one grasshopper, not that big of a deal. When you get thousands of them, they devastate land. They devastate crops. They're known, a locust infestation are known to collapse governments and countries. Economies will fall because of a locust infestation. This small little insect. I know some of you are thinking, I've seen some this big. Okay. But then the lizard. This is actually an Israeli lizard pictured from the deserts over there. It's a small lizard. Very tiny. You can see it. It's barely on. It's no bigger than just a part of the guy's thumb. But yet the Bible tells us in Proverbs 30 that they enter the king's palaces and they live like royalty. And so These small things have great wisdom that we can gain from it. It's telling us these insects, these creatures are so small, but they do one thing and they do it well. They do it so well. As we enter into the new year, let's not focus on these grand, huge, big ideas. Let's focus on small things. I'm going to give you 4 right now. Small things that the Bible tells us that we can focus on, and we can do these well. And I'm not saying all 4. Maybe for you, you pick one of these 4 and work on it this year. And see what God can do with a small thing in your life. The first one, we have to look right in our text. Little faith. Little faith, small faith. I love this. This is why I know that Jesus is not mad at his disciples, because it says, why couldn't we do this? It's because of your little faith. And then Jesus says, if you have the faith the size of the mustard seed. Wait a second. You couldn't do it because you had small faith. And Jesus is saying all you need is small faith. Jesus, I think you have your illustrations mixed up here. No, their faith was in the wrong thing. Jesus is saying if you had the faith, instead of faith in the mountain, if you had faith in the Creator, if you had a little bit of faith in what Jesus can do in your life. By the way, you know how you move a mountain? One rock at a time. That's how you move a mountain. It takes time. Jesus says the faith the size of the mustard seed. I had to do a little bit of research. I was like, I looked in my kitchen and I found the mustard seeds. I was like, yeah, they're kind of small, but they're not the smallest thing in there. What are you talking about, Jesus? This is, okay, that? No. This is what he's talking about. This is actually a mustard tree, is what it's called. It's prevalent over in the Middle East. It's all around. But those are the size of the seeds of that tree. There are hundreds of seeds in this picture. Hundreds. And Jesus is saying the size of that seed is the size of what faith you need. But not faith in the mountain, faith in your God. Not faith in your problems, faith in your God. Not faith in your circumstances, but faith in your God. God's not asking us to have faith that will actually pray, you know what, Mount Rathdrum's in my way, so I need to move it. Pat and Roxy are like, please don't pray that. We live on that mountain. We're not talking about praying about moving mountains. We're talking about praying that a God can do anything. That our God, the God of the universe, the one true God, can do anything and everything according to his own will. That's the kind of faith we need to have. The faith of a mustard seed. So, do you have mountains in your lives? Maybe this year you're facing relationship issues. I've heard so many people talk about just very troubling family situations. Maybe not directly in their immediate family, but their extended family as well. Maybe that's a mountain in your life right now. Maybe it's financial things that are mounting up and they're huge in your life. Maybe it's health issues. Again, I'm going back to our one phrase that I want you to remember. Have a little faith in a great God. Have a little faith in a great God. You know what else the Bible says does not need to be big, but actually is small is better? Our prayers. Our prayers. When the disciples asked teach us to pray. You know what Jesus did? He gave them a small prayer. Oh, we've heard stories of people praying for hours and hours, huge, elaborate prayers. And we're like, God only listens to those. No, actually, Jesus was saying in that teaching, he said, don't pay attention to those people who go into the synagogue and have elaborate, significant, huge prayers and use big words, and go down to the small. Use those simple ideas of what's in your head. Just be honest with God. I love this. God knows what's on your mind already. So why make it into a major prayer where you have to pray, oh God in heaven, hear today my prayers, and we drag this prayer on. Jesus actually says it's not the prayers, those are not the prayers that get heard. It's those simple, small prayers in your quiet place that get heard. I love talking to people and I ask them to pray and they're like, well, I don't know how to pray, Pastor. Yeah, you do. Just talk to God like you're talking to me. God knows and God answers the honest, genuine, heartfelt prayers. So you want to pray better this year? Start small. Start small. When you wake up in the morning, God, help me to be focused on you today. That's it. I'm not saying to list out all your prayer requests. Get up and just say, God, help me to see you today. God, show me what you want me to do. Those prayers are going to get answered. Then Jesus also gives us a story where he recognizes a small act and celebrates it for its smallness, and that is the widow's mite in her giving. The widow takes and she gives her offering, and she places those small tokens into the bucket, and that's what she had. That's all that she had. She gave the little bit that she could. And Jesus says her faith, her gift is bigger than the ones who are dropping thousands of dollars into the bucket. Why? Because it's her faith that's huge. And again, it really wasn't huge. It was the size of a mustard seed. But it accomplished great things. It's not the size of the gift that we're talking about here or that Jesus focuses on. I know as Christians we use the standard and we strive for the actual tithe, a 10th% of your income. You know what? There's so many people who can't do that for various reasons. And I'm not saying I give in to all the excuses, but what I do say is I recognize the challenge that some people have in just doing that. You know what? Don't worry about the 10%. Give what you can and trust God. Give, start giving faithfully and generously and see what God can do with that. Jesus also exampled for us a small thing that can have a big impact, and that is in his service. In how he served people. He exampled that by lowering himself and doing the very smallest thing by washing his disciples' feet. And he says that the lowest position, the last place, because that was the one job even the servants didn't want to do. I imagine they were okay with washing the toilets, but they did not want to wash people's feet because they wore sandals at the best. Most of the time they were barefoot, and they were walking around in fields where there's livestock. Do you get the idea of what's on their feet now? And Jesus washed their feet. It was the job that no one wanted to do. And Jesus says, this is the job that we need done. Want to serve? Want to be more like Jesus this year? Serve in the smallest way. Do one thing well and trust God. Do it for the glory of God. Just because small things start off that way doesn't mean that they're insignificant or irrelevant. In a modern day situation, I read an article today, or this week, I should say, of we have a quarterback who's starting on a playoff team who was Mr. Irrelevant in the draft, which means he was the last person picked as a player on a team. He was kept on because they know they have to keep someone, but it's the quarterback for the 49ers. He's starting now, and he's won 3 games with multiple touchdowns as being the most irrelevant person in the NFL. Small things have great impact when we trust a great God. So have a little faith in a great God who can do great things. But also, just because it starts off small, I don't want you to get the idea that it's going to make it something big. To wrap up, I want you to see just one verse here in Colossians chapter 1, verse 9 and 10 actually. He says this, "For this reason also, since the day we have heard of this, we haven't stopped praying for you. We are asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all wisdom and spiritual understanding, so that you may walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work, and growing in the knowledge of God." There's 3 areas in our lives that the potential or the capacity to grow we're going to see the significance of these small things. And that's in wisdom, faith, and fruit. Wisdom, here it says that you may grow in all knowledge of his will according to all wisdom and spiritual understanding. We understand God better by having wisdom of him and his word. Cross-reference that with James chapter 1. If you don't understand something, ask of God who will tell you what it means. And he gives to all abundantly the knowledge that they need. James chapter 1. The faith. Again, we see that it's a little faith that Jesus said. Here we see that it's faith that is pleasing to God. Hebrews chapter 11 says that without faith it is impossible to please God. What kind of faith is God looking for? Just a little faith. And then fruit. Cross-reference that with Galatians chapter 5. You want the Holy Spirit working in your life? Have the capacity to grow. So today, as we look at the new year, let us think and plan and pray for the future of our church, for the future of our own lives, but let us think of the small things that we can do well. Think of the small things that we can do well. Start small and let us build our lives on the small faith that we do have. And see what God can do with just that small mustard seed of a faith.
Thank you for joining us for worship today. I hope and pray that God has challenged or inspired you through this message. And if he has, please leave a comment or send us an email and let us know. Also, you could do those same things to let us know if there's any prayer requests you have that we could join you in prayer for. Thank you again for watching. Hope to see you again soon. God bless you.